The bank teller slid an envelope across the counter and said, "This has been waiting for you for 11 years. 11 years. I was holding a key I found taped behind a picture frame in a house I hadn't entered since I was 19. My hands would not stop shaking. Inside that safety deposit box were 31 letters. 31 sealed envelopes. My name, in my grandmother's handwriting, on every single one. She had written them over 9 years. Mailed every single one. Not one ever reached me. Because my mother had intercepted all of them. When I finished reading the last letter, I understood why my grandmother died believing I had abandoned her. And I understood exactly what my mother had taken from us both. Stay with me. Because what I found in letter number 26 changed everything. And I need you to hear it. Let me take you back to Decatur, Georgia. 1994. I was born Renata Louise Caldwell. Renata, after my grandmother. Louise after nobody in particular, just a name my mother liked from a soap opera she watched during her pregnancy. My grandmother, the woman I was named after, went by Nana Rennie to everyone who loved her. She was a small woman. Barely 5'2". Silver locks she kept pinned under a church hat on Sundays, and loose around her shoulders every other day of the week. She smelled like Jergens lotion and black tea. She laughed from her belly. My grandmother raised me for the first 8 years of my life. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of a person. My mother, Darlene Caldwell, was 19 when she had me. And 20 when she decided that motherhood was not compatible with the life she was trying to build. She was chasing something. She always described it as freedom. As opportunity. As her turn. And in practice, what that meant was, she moved to Atlanta proper. About 20 minutes away. But a different world entirely. She left me in the 2-bedroom house on Orchard Street with my grandmother. Who never once made me feel like I was a burden. Or a consolation prize. Nana Rennie had a garden in the backyard. Collard greens, tomatoes, 4 different kinds of herbs she used in her cooking. She had a Bible on the nightstand and a romance novel underneath the Bible. She had a wind chime on the porch, bought at a church sale in 1979. And she never replaced it, even when it lost 2 of its tubes. She had a way of looking at you when you were talking. Really looking. Like your words were landing somewhere important. She taught me to read before kindergarten. She made me oatmeal every morning with brown sugar and a little bit of nutmeg. She came to every school event. Every parent-teacher conference. Every single thing. Dressed like she had somewhere important to be. Because to her, anywhere I was happened to be somewhere important. My mother visited on holidays and occasional weekends. She would arrive with energy and gifts and big promises. And I would get excited every time, because I was a child. And children are built for hope. She would take me for ice cream or to the movies. And for a few hours I would feel like I had a regular mother. Then she would drop me back off at Orchard Street. And I would watch her car pull away. And feel the particular kind of loneliness that only comes from loving someone. Who keeps choosing to leave. My grandmother never said a bad word about my mother in front of me. Not once. If she had feelings about the arrangement, and she must have, she was human. She kept them between herself and God. And possibly the pages of that romance novel under her Bible. Your mama loves you in her own way, she used to say. People love different. You just got to learn which way is which. I didn't understand what she meant when I was 7. I understand it completely now. When I was 8 years old, my mother met a man named Gregory Price. Gregory had a good job, a house in the Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta, and 2 children from a previous marriage, Caleb and Simone. He was stable and ambitious and, from what I could tell, genuinely fond of my mother. Within a year, they were married. And shortly after the wedding, my mother came to Orchard Street and told my grandmother that she was ready to be a full-time parent. She was taking me to Buckhead. I remember Nana Rennie sitting very still at the kitchen table while my mother explained this. I remember the sound of the wind chime on the porch. I remember thinking, for some reason, that I should count the tiles on the kitchen floor. As if having a number in my head would make the conversation easier to survive. My grandmother did not fight it. She hugged me for a long time at the door. Longer than usual. She pressed her cheek against the top of my head and said, softly, so only I could hear. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Renata Louise. Don't you forget that. Not ever." I was 9 years old when I moved to Buckhead. I did not know that it would be the beginning of the longest separation of my life. Gregory Price's house was beautiful. The way houses in magazines are beautiful. Lots of space, high ceilings, matching furniture, everything in its right place. It was also about as warm as a hotel lobby. I want to be fair to Gregory. He was not a cruel man. He was not a villain in any traditional sense. He was distant with me in the way people are distant when they don't quite know what to do with something they didn't originally choose. He paid for my clothes, my school supplies, my braces, my everything. He was providing. And I think in his mind, providing was the whole job. My mother, though. My mother was a different story. I need to be careful here, because I have spent a long time in therapy, yes, actual therapy, with an actual licensed professional, trying to describe my mother accurately. Without flattening her into a pure villain. Because the truth is more complicated. And the complicated truth is the only one I can live with. My mother loved me. I believe that. But she loved me like someone who had never actually learned how to love a child. Which meant she loved me in ways that were mostly about her. She loved showing people that she had a daughter. She loved the idea of me, smart, eventually accomplished, the way people love something that reflects well on them. She was proud of my grades the way Gregory was proud of his car. As a thing. As evidence. What she was not capable of, or not willing to do, was actually see me. And what she was actively hostile to was my relationship with Nana Rennie. It started small. The way these things always do. Nana Rennie would call the house phone, and my mother would answer and tell her I was busy. I wouldn't find out about the call until later. Sometimes days later. And by then I had already missed the chance to call back. I was 9, 10, 11 years old. I didn't have my own phone. I didn't have my own anything. I depended entirely on the adults around me to connect me to the world. When I asked to visit Orchard Street, my mother always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. Gregory had plans for the family. I had homework. We were going somewhere. There was always something. In the first full year after I moved in, I saw my grandmother exactly twice. Once at Thanksgiving. And once when Gregory drove me to Orchard Street for a Sunday afternoon visit. That lasted exactly 3 hours. Before my mother called and said it was time to come home. I missed Nana Rennie the way you miss a limb. Constantly. In the background of everything. But I was a child. And children adapt, because survival is baked into us at the cellular level. I made friends at my new school. I got good at soccer. I joined the choir. I built a life inside the house in Buckhead the way a plant grows toward whatever light is available. Even if the window is small. What I did not know, what I had no way of knowing, was that my grandmother was writing to me. She had always been a letter writer. Long before email, long before texting, Nana Rennie wrote letters. She wrote to her sisters in South Carolina. She wrote to her church friends when they moved away. She wrote to her own mother until her mother passed. Writing letters was how she processed the world. How she maintained her connections. How she said the things that were too large or too important for a phone call. When I moved to Buckhead, she started writing to me. She sent them to the house in Buckhead. To me, care of my mother's address. She wrote once a month. Sometimes more. She wrote about her garden. About church. About the neighbors. She asked about my school and my friends. She told me stories about when my mother was little, funny stories, warm stories. The kind of family history that stitches a person together. She told me how proud she was of me. And she always ended with the same line. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Renata Louise. Don't you forget that. I did not receive a single one of those letters. Not one. Because my mother collected them from the mailbox. And she kept them. And she never told me they existed. Engagement pause, community moment. If you have ever been kept from someone you loved, a grandparent, a sibling, anyone, by a person who was supposed to protect you, drop a heart in the comments right now. You are not alone in this. Keep watching. By the time I was 14, I had mostly stopped asking to visit Orchard Street. Not because I had stopped missing my grandmother, but because asking and being told no had become its own kind of pain. And I had learned, the way children learn the things that hurt them, to stop reaching for what I couldn't have. Nana Rennie and I did speak on the phone occasionally. My mother couldn't completely cut that off. It would have been too obvious. But the calls were monitored in a way I could feel but couldn't name. My mother would hover nearby. Or she would give me a look when I picked up the phone. A look that meant, keep it short, keep it light, don't make this into a whole thing. And I, wanting peace, wanting not to cause trouble, would talk to my grandmother for 10 or 15 minutes. And keep everything on the surface. I don't think Nana Rennie knew, in those years, that I wasn't getting her letters. I think she believed I was reading them and simply not writing back. Because what other explanation would there be? She was sending them. They were going somewhere. Maybe she thought I was busy. Or that I had grown distant. Or that the transition to a new life had slowly replaced her in my heart. The thought of her believing that breaks me open even now. She kept writing anyway. That was who she was. She kept writing even without a response. Because love, for Nana Rennie, was not conditional on being received. When I was 16, my grandmother had a mild stroke. I found out about it 4 days after it happened. I overheard my mother on the phone with someone from the church. I went to my mother and asked why nobody had told me. And she said, and I want you to hear this clearly. She said, I didn't want to upset you during your school year. 16 years old. A mild stroke. My grandmother. 4 days. I went to my room and I cried so hard I gave myself a headache. And then I did something I had never done before. I waited until my mother and Gregory were asleep. I crept to the kitchen phone. And I called Orchard Street. My grandmother answered on the second ring. Her voice was a little slower than usual, the stroke had affected her speech slightly. But it was still her. It was still the same voice that had read me bedtime stories. And hummed in the kitchen while she cooked. And said, you are the best thing. Nana, I said. And I couldn't say anything else for a minute. Baby girl, she said. I've been waiting for you to call. We talked for 47 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock the entire time. Terrified my mother would wake up. And then Nana Rennie asked, very gently. Do you still get my letters? I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. There was a silence on the other end of the phone. A specific kind of silence. The kind that means someone has just received information that rearranges everything. I've been writing to you, she said, carefully. Every month. Sometimes more. For 7 years. 7 years. I didn't know what to say. I was 16 and I didn't have the framework yet for what I was hearing. I said something like, maybe they got lost in the mail? Because I could not, at 16, hold the alternative in my hands. My grandmother said, maybe so, baby. But her voice was different when she said it. Quieter. I think she knew then. I think she understood exactly what had happened to those letters. After that phone call, things shifted. I was bolder now. Less willing to shrink. My mother noticed and expressed her displeasure in the cold, controlled way she expressed everything. Shorter answers, loaded sighs, the silent treatment for a few days. But she couldn't take the phone away from a 16-year-old without a reason. So she endured it. I graduated high school in 2012 and went to the University of Georgia on an academic scholarship. My mother cried at the graduation. She hugged me and told me how proud she was. And I stood there in my cap and gown. And felt the complicated mix of love and grief that she had always stirred up in me. My grandmother came to my graduation. She sat in the third row in a purple dress with a matching hat. And when I walked across the stage, she stood up and clapped and hooped so loudly that the people around her laughed. She was 67 years old. She had survived a second stroke that limited her mobility. She had gotten a ride from a church friend named Miss Evelyn. And she had worn her best dress. I have a photograph from that day. Me in my cap and gown. Her in her purple dress. Both of us laughing at something outside the frame. I have that photograph on my wall now. I look at it every day. That was the last time I saw her in person. College changed me, the way college is supposed to. I was suddenly surrounded by people my own age, by ideas, by choices. By a version of myself that was not defined by Buckhead. Or my mother's particular shape of love. I also, and I say this honestly, became bad at keeping in touch. Not because I didn't love them. But because building a new life takes everything you have. And I was 20 years old and learning to exist in the world. I called Nana Rennie less often than I should have. I told myself I would visit over break. And then break came, and I had plans. Or I was tired. Or I went somewhere else. I told myself I had time. Everyone who has ever lost someone suddenly tells you the same thing. They told themselves they had time. I was 23, in my first job as a production assistant at a small media company in Atlanta. When Nana Rennie had her third stroke. This one was serious. My mother called me immediately this time, to her credit. And I drove to Grady Memorial Hospital. And I sat in a waiting room. And I watched doctors come and go for 6 hours. Before someone came out and told me she was stable. But that she had sustained significant damage. She would need full-time care. She would not be going back to live alone on Orchard Street. She was transferred to Magnolia Gardens, a care facility in Decatur. Despite its name, it was clean and adequately staffed. It smelled like institutional cleaning products and something trying to be flowers. It cost $4,200 a month. My grandmother covered it with her pension and her savings. My mother and I were not asked to contribute. I visited her at Magnolia Gardens 4 times in the first year. She knew me every time. Her speech was slower. Her body more limited. But her eyes were the same. Sharp and warm and entirely present. She would hold my hand and ask about my life and tell me I looked good. "You look like you're doing well, baby," she would say. And I would say yes, I was. And she would smile and squeeze my hand. I don't know why I didn't visit more. I will carry that question for the rest of my life. The honest answer, as much as I can find it, is this. Visiting her hurt. Seeing her diminished from what she had been was painful. And I handled that pain by staying away. I told myself I was giving her rest. I told myself she was well cared for. I told myself I would come more often next month. This is a very human thing to do. It is also a form of cowardice. And I own it. During this period, my mother was Nana Rennie's primary point of contact with the facility. She handled the paperwork, communicated with the doctors, attended the care meetings. I appreciate this. It was not nothing. But I also understand now that this position gave her enormous power. over the information that flowed between my grandmother and the rest of the world, including me. When Nana Rennie started asking the nurses to help her write letters, because her hands were no longer steady enough to write alone, my mother was notified. She was the emergency contact. She was copied on everything. My grandmother dictated letters to a nursing aide named Patricia, a young woman who would sit with her in the afternoons and write down what Nana Rennie said in her slow, careful way. Patricia told me this later. After everything, she said my grandmother was very specific about what she wanted to say and to whom. She dictated 4 letters in the last year of her life, addressed to me. Patricia mailed them from the facility's outgoing mail. Properly stamped. Properly addressed. None of them arrived, because my mother had redirected them. Redirected to her own house, where they joined the other letters. The ones from Orchard Street. The ones going back 11 years. My grandmother died on March 14, 2019. She was 74 years old. She died on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise, with Patricia sitting beside her, and a window open to let in the spring air. I was not there. I found out at 8:47 in the morning when my mother called me. I remember the exact time because I had just made coffee, and I looked at the clock on the microwave when the phone rang. I drove to the facility alone. I sat with her for a while. With her body, which was already so far from her. I held her hand the way she had held mine so many times. And I told her I was sorry. And I meant it for so many things. Take a breath with me. If you are watching this and you have someone you have been putting off calling, someone you keep telling yourself you will visit next month, I am asking you, right now, to pick up the phone after this video. Whatever complicated thing is in the way, it is not bigger than the time you have left. Comment "I'm calling" if that landed for you. Keep watching, because this is where the story changes. My grandmother's estate was modest but real. The house on Orchard Street, which she owned outright. Her savings, approximately $47,000 remaining after her years at the facility. Her personal belongings. She had a will. It was uncomplicated. There was nothing in the will for my mother. There was nothing in the will for me. At the time, I accepted this. I didn't expect anything. She had every right to leave her things wherever she chose. And if I felt a small sting of something, I set it aside. Because grief was occupying most of my interior space anyway. 2 years passed. I got a new job, a better one. I moved to a nicer apartment in Inman Park. I started therapy. I did the work of getting to know myself a little better. I was, cautiously, becoming okay. Then, in January of 2021, nearly 2 years after my grandmother's death, I got a call from her attorney, Mr. Franco Duya. He had a reedy, careful voice. He apologized for the delay. He said that in finalizing all aspects of the estate, something had come to his attention that he needed to address with me directly. He had found a record, tucked inside my grandmother's secondary files, of a safety deposit box at First Heritage Bank in Decatur. The box had been rented in 2008, 11 years before her death. And the rental agreement listed a single authorized access person. Me. Renata Louise Caldwell. I sat with my phone in my lap for a very long time after that call ended. She had rented that box in 2008. 1 year after I had moved to Buckhead. 1 year after she started writing the letters. She was already planning for a future in which I might need something she was storing. Or she was already afraid that something would prevent her from reaching me. And she was building a back channel. She was preparing for the possibility that my mother would not let her words through. I cried for a long time. And then I got in my car. First Heritage Bank was a small branch in a strip mall on Candler Road in Decatur. It had the slightly worn, dependable feeling of a place that had been serving the same community for 40 years. The branch manager, Ms. Cheryl Bivens, confirmed that the box was on record and walked me to a back room. The kind of room banks have for these things. Small and private. A table, a few chairs, fluorescent light. She came back with a long metal box the size of a shoebox. Set it in front of me. And said, "Take all the time you need." And then she left. And I was alone with it. I sat with the box closed for probably 2 full minutes. Trying to breathe normally. And failing slightly. Then I opened it. The first thing I saw was an envelope on top with my name on it. The handwriting was my grandmother's. Strong and upright in the early letters, shakier in the later ones. Inside that envelope was a single piece of paper. A note. It read, "Renata Louise. If you are reading this, it means you found the key and you found your way here. I put the key where I knew you would someday look, behind the photo of you and me at your 5th birthday, the one with the yellow cake. I always knew you would go through the pictures someday. Inside this box are letters I wrote to you. I started writing them when you moved to Buckhead and I could not reach you the way I wanted to. I mailed them for years and you never wrote back. And for a long time I thought you had simply grown away from me the way children sometimes do. But then one night you called me, when you were 16, and you told me you had never received a single letter. And I understood. I am not going to say your mother's name here, or tell you what I believe happened. That is between her and God. What I want to say is this. I wrote to you every month for 9 years. 31 letters. Every one of them is in this box, in the order I wrote them. I want you to read them all. I also want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for one day. Not even when I thought you had forgotten me, which I now know you had not. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Renata Louise. Don't you forget that. Not ever. All my love, always. Nana Rennie. I cannot tell you what it felt like to read that note. Because language is not large enough. I can tell you that I pressed it against my chest. And I cried without sound. The kind of crying that happens below the throat, in the body itself. Ms. Bivens knocked softly on the door about 20 minutes later and asked if I needed water. I said yes. She brought me a paper cup and set it on the table without comment. And I was grateful beyond what I could say. The 31 letters were arranged chronologically in rubber-banded bundles. The earliest was dated September 14, 2007, 2 weeks after I moved to Buckhead. The most recent was dated August 3, 2016, 3 years before she died. I did not read them all that day. I read the first 5 and the last 3. And I took photographs of every single one with my phone. And I took the originals home with me in a tote bag that felt like it contained something sacred. Because it did. Over the following 2 weeks, I read every letter. In the early letters, she described her garden. She told me about the tomatoes coming in late that year. And how she had made sauce and frozen it in mason jars. She asked about my new school, my new room. Whether Caleb and Simone were kind to me. In the middle letters, written when I was 12 and 13 and 14. She started telling me family history. Stories about her own childhood in South Carolina. About the great-aunt who had played piano in a jazz club in the 1940s. About the uncle who had marched in Selma and come home changed and quiet. She was giving me my lineage. She was making sure I knew where I came from. Because she was afraid that without these letters, I would grow up not knowing. In one letter, written when I was 15, she described a dream she had. She was in her garden. And I came walking through the gate, grown up and laughing. And I sat down, and we talked for hours. She said she woke up from that dream crying. Not from sadness. But from something she didn't have a word for. She said she wrote it down so I would know. That she dreamed about me. That I visited her, at least that way. In a letter from 2013, when I was in college, she wrote, "I don't know if these letters are reaching you. I mail them and I pray and I wait and nothing comes back. But I keep writing because it helps me to talk to you, even if it's only on paper. Even if you never read this, it helps me to say it." She kept writing to me, even when she thought I might never read the words. And in the last letter, the one from August 2016, dictated to Patricia in her room at the care facility, she wrote this: "I am at peace with my life. I want you to know that. I have had love in abundance, your grandfather, God rest him, your mother when she was small, and you. Most of all, you. I am not afraid of what comes next. What I am is sorry that we lost so much time. That's the only part one would undo if I could. I want you to have a good life, Renata Louise. I want you to find someone who loves you thoroughly. Who sees all the way through to the real you, the way I always have. I want you to be kind to yourself. I want you to plant something, anything, a single plant on a windowsill is enough, so you remember that living things need tending. I want you to know that my love for you has no last page. It does not end here. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Don't you forget that. Not ever." I did not go to my mother immediately. I sat with what I had found for 3 weeks. I read the letters. I talked to my therapist. I cried. I made lists. I cried again. I needed to be steady before I walked into what I knew was coming. Because here is what I knew, after reading those letters and thinking through the timeline. My mother had intercepted letters from Orchard Street for at least 7 years. From 2007 to approximately 2014. Letters that my grandmother had mailed to the house in Buckhead. My mother had collected them and kept them, rather than giving them to me. She had, for over a decade, systematically severed my connection to the woman who raised me. Not with one dramatic act, but with 1,000 small ones. Intercepted mail. Managed phone calls. Strategic information control. The dripping faucet of distance, maintained so gradually that I had no single moment of rupture to point to. Just a slow, managed drift that she had orchestrated. She had stolen 11 years of letters. She had let my grandmother die believing she had been forgotten. I drove to my mother's condo on a Saturday morning in March 2021. I did not tell her I was coming. She answered the door in a robe, coffee in hand, clearly surprised. She invited me in with the slightly elevated, gracious manner she defaulted to when she was caught off guard. The manner that said, "I am composed. I am a woman who is always composed." I sat down at her kitchen table. I set the tote bag with the letters on the table between us. She looked at the bag. Something moved across her face, something fast and controlled, like a window shade being pulled. And then it was gone. And her expression was neutral. "What's that?" she said. "You know what it is," I said. She did not deny it. Not completely. She sat across from me, held her coffee cup in both hands, and chose her words very carefully. The way she had always done. And she said, "I was protecting our family." I asked her to explain what that meant. She said my grandmother had never approved of the move to Buckhead. That she had interfered, historically, in her parenting. That the letters were full of things designed to make me feel abandoned. And that was not a message she was willing to let into the house. I asked her if she had read the letters. She said she had looked at a few of them. Early on. I asked her what she had done with them after she looked at them. She said she had put them in a box. She had not thrown them away. She said that as if it were evidence of mercy. I told her that the letters were about tomatoes and family history. And dreams. And a woman who loved me so completely. That she kept writing even when she thought I would never read the words. I told her there was nothing in those letters designed to hurt anyone. I told her that what she had done was not protection. That what she had done was theft. That she had stolen my grandmother's voice from me for 9 years. And she had let an old woman spend her last years believing that the child she raised had simply stopped caring. My mother was very quiet. Then she said, "I did what I thought was best." I looked at her for a long time. I said, "I know you believe that. And I need you to know that what you did caused serious harm. To me, and to her. And I am going to take a long time to decide what kind of relationship I want with you after this. If any." I picked up my tote bag. And I left. Engagement pause, community moment. I have to pause here. Because what I just described is one of the hardest conversations of my life. If you have ever had to hold someone accountable for something they did in the name of love. If you know what it is to sit across from someone and tell them the truth they don't want to hear. Drop a blue heart in the comments. It matters to know you are not the only one. I want to tell you about the part of this story I did not see coming. When I went back through the letters more carefully, with fresh eyes, after the confrontation, I noticed something in the later ones. Starting around 2013, my grandmother began including small, practical pieces of information alongside the emotional content. Almost like she knew the letters might be intercepted. And was hiding the important details in plain sight. In a 2013 letter, in a paragraph about her savings, she mentioned, casually, between a story about Miss Evelyn's beagle and a description of a new rose bush, that she had added my name to a document with her attorney. She said it was just a small thing, for just in case. In a 2015 letter, she mentioned a folder she kept in the drawer under the kitchen phone on Orchard Street. The yellow folder. The one with the important papers. She said she had put something inside it with my name on it. When the house was cleared after her death, I had been there. I had helped. I had not known to look for a yellow folder under the kitchen phone. I had walked right past it. But her attorney knew. When I called him back and asked about the document she had mentioned, he told me that yes, there was an additional document. A codicil to her will. A legal amendment. Added in 2013. Filed separately from the main will. It had come to light during the final review of her estate papers. Which was why he had called me in the first place. The codicil established a small trust. $22,000. Drawn from a savings account my grandmother had maintained separately from her primary account. One that my mother had not known about. One that had been quietly accumulating for years. The trust was specific in its intention. The funds were to be used by Renata Louise Caldwell. For one of 3 purposes. Education, housing, or the start of a business. And attached to the codicil was a letter, in my grandmother's handwriting, that said, "This is not for anything you need right now. This is for when you are standing at a beginning. You will know when that is." She had been setting that money aside since at least 2013. Quietly. Without telling anyone. Building a small, secret inheritance for me. That my mother could not intercept. Because it was not in a letter, and it was not in a mailbox. It was in a legal document, filed with a lawyer, with my name on it. She had outmaneuvered the interference. She had planned for the possibility that things would not go the way they should have. And she had built a path around it. I used the $22,000 as a down payment. On the equipment and production software I needed to start my own podcast production company. I launched it in late 2021. I named it Orchard Street Media. It is doing well. Better than well. Every single time I sit down to work. In the office I built with the money she saved for me. I feel her in the room. I am 29 years old as I tell you this story. I am sitting in the Inman Park apartment I have made into a home. With the photograph of me and Nana Rennie on the wall. The one from my graduation, both of us laughing. And a small potted rosemary plant on the windowsill. Because she told me to plant something. My relationship with my mother is complicated. Which is probably the most honest sentence I have ever said. We speak. Not frequently. There are things between us that have not been resolved. And may never be resolved. Because resolution requires a kind of accountability that my mother has not yet been able to fully give. She has said she is sorry, once, in a text message, brief and careful. And I have told her I hurt her, and I am still processing. That is where we are. I have thought many times about the why of what she did. Not to excuse it, there is no excuse. But because understanding it is part of how I survive it. I think my mother was afraid. I think she was afraid that my grandmother's love was bigger than hers. And she was right about that. And the right response to that fear would have been to become bigger. Instead, she chose to make the competition smaller. She chose to shrink what was available to me, so that her portion would feel sufficient by comparison. She didn't understand, and maybe still doesn't. That love does not work that way. That giving a child access to more love does not dilute the love they have for you. It multiplies the whole field. I would have loved my mother differently, but no less. If she had let those letters through, I would have been a more rooted, more whole, more secure person. Which would have made me better at loving her, and everyone else. What she did diminished us both. And yet, I have 31 letters. I have my grandmother's voice, preserved across 20 years. Telling me about tomatoes and rose bushes. And jazz playing great aunts. And dreams where I came through the garden gate laughing. I have the history she made sure I would have. I have the money she set aside in a secret account. And saved for my beginning. She thought of everything. She knew something might go wrong. And she prepared for it. And she found a way through. Nana Rennie. 5'2" in church hats and silver locks and a purple graduation dress. Standing up in the third row and whooping for me. The most strategic, most loving, most quietly stubborn woman I have ever known. The best foundation a person could have. I read her letters again every March. On the 14th. On the anniversary of the morning she left. The morning with the open window and the spring air. I read them and I talked to her out loud. The way I should have talked to her so much more when I had the chance. I tell her about the business and the apartment. And the rosemary plant. And the things I am becoming. I tell her I am sorry for the years I managed away. I tell her I know, now, that she never stopped. And I know she hears me. I know it the same way I know anything true. Not because someone proved it to me. But because the alternative makes no sense. Here is what I want to leave with you tonight. There are people in your life, maybe one person, maybe more, who love you in a way that runs deeper than circumstance. They love you through silence and distance and misunderstanding. They write to you even when you don't write back. They save up quietly for your beginning. They sit in the third row in their best dress. Don't let other people manage your access to those people. Don't let anyone, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much you want peace. Don't let anyone control what gets through to you. Check the mail yourself. Make the call yourself. Get in the car and go. And if you are the person who is still here, the one who can still call, the one who can still visit, I am begging you. Don't choose convenience over connection. The letters you don't send. The visits you keep rescheduling. The calls you keep putting off. Those are the things you will carry the longest. Plant something. Tend it. Let it remind you that living things need showing up for. That is my story. I am Renata Caldwell. And my grandmother was Nana Rennie. And she was the best thing that ever happened to me, too. If this story reached you, if you cried, if you recognized something in it, if it made you pick up the phone, tell me in the comments. Tell me who in your life you are going to call after this. Tell me their name. And if you are new here, if someone sent you this video or the algorithm found you, welcome. Subscribe. We tell real stories here. Stories that cost something to tell. You belong in this community. I will see you in the next one.